I'm curious. I am curious. Curious.
By nature.
Welcome to Curious by Nature. I'm Jessica Johnson. How do you recognize a person, a word, or an object? We are constantly processing visual information and accessing parts of the brain that store meaning so quickly that it seems instantaneous. It all happens without us even thinking about it consciously. From studying the way we recognize patterns and learn language, researchers are able to understand how we interpret the complex electrical impulses of neurons firing in the brain. At the Beckman Institute at the University of Illinois, our guest today is conducting experiments to unravel these mysteries of the mind and gaining new insights into the functions of perception and memory. Dr. Federmeier, thank you for joining us.
I'm Kara Federmeier. I'm a professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Illinois. I'm also affiliated with Linguistics, Kinesiology, and Neuroscience, and I'm a full-time faculty member at the Beckman Institute for Advanced Science and Technology, and there I co-direct the Illinois Language and Literacy Initiative. I'm curious about how the brain infuses meaning into our experience of the world. So as human beings, we go about our days and we experience a world that we see through a lens of meaning. And what I mean by that is that we look around a room and we see a cup, we see a pen, we see a keyboard, we look out the window and we see a street scene, someone walks into the room and we recognize that that's our colleague, or we read a book and understand the words, or we hear words coming in and understand them. And I think we don't appreciate how complicated a process it really is for the brain to take that perceptual input and to be able to link it to all the things that we're bringing to mind when we encounter these perceptual stimuli. So, an object is really a bunch of lines and shapes and colors and shadings, and that's what the brain is actually getting at. And so to understand that something in the environment is a cup, or that the series of lines that make up a word is a word, the brain has to take that perceptual input. It has to separate out which pieces of it go with which objects and kind of figure out what's out there. And we know that that's a very complex process that we don't yet fully understand, that we can't yet fully get artificial agents to do the way humans do. And that's just the perceptual piece. But then, when we recognize something as a cup, what we're really doing is linking all of that perceptual information to all these things we know about cups, not just what they look like, but how we use them, how we would move our hand if we wanted to grasp them, our associations with that cup and our morning coffee ritual, and the feelings and the aromas that are associated with that. This is a really hard process of taking a bunch of inherently complex perceptual information and then linking it up with information we've stored from our experience and knowledge and memory. And we do this continuously throughout our days. We experience it as if it were instantaneous. We don't go from saying, what is that object? Oh, there's some, colors and some shapes. Oh, it must be a cup. We just see a cup. So this process must be really rapid. And we do this very infrequently, making errors in the process. And we don't even feel like it's very effortful. And so my lab at the broadest level is trying to understand, how does this happen? How can we just look at a word or look at an object or look at a face and instantly get all of that meaning?
What is it that would be helpful for you to understand how people perceive things?
So one thing is that, for example, we might want to know, as educators or as people trying to help people learn to read or learn a second language, you might want to know, when is a particular word hard to understand, and when is it easier to understand? And so having a measure of the brain activity associated with meaning processing, if we see that there's more of that activity, that might be a sign that this is harder or a richer kind of stimulus for someone. And so it could help us understand better what is difficult and what is easy about language. We also are interested in what people will remember about what they've seen or what they read. And, the way that you make connections between a picture and a word and what it means is a really important determinant of whether or not you're likely to remember what you're likely to remember about it later. And in some really new lines of work in my lab, we're looking at something called image memorability. So it's been known for a little while that some pictures are easier to remember than others. And this is kind of true across people. So if you take a large set of people and a large set of pictures and you give them those pictures, not everyone will remember any one of the pictures. But there are some pictures that reliably more people are going to remember than others. What's really intriguing about this fact is that thus far, nobody has been able to figure out what it is about those pictures that makes them easier to remember. It's not something simple like, the colors or the contrast or or how likable those pictures are, how aesthetically pleasing they are, or people have tried lots of different things to figure out why some pictures are more memorable. And so we've started looking at that with our electrophysiological techniques and some recently published work. And what we find is that the meaning properties of these pictures are important, and that somehow these pictures are pictures that get into meaning in a more direct way. Even though we can't guess, that's the other thing about these pictures is you can't necessarily guess. I could show you and say, which ones of these do you think are more memorable? And people aren't very good at that. So again, it's not something that's standing out in a kind of clear, conscious way about these pictures. But when we measure the brain activity, we can see that the signals that we can pick up associated with kind of how much meaning information is becoming available, they actually kind of are a more pointed, have more pointed meanings. They don't require as much activity to get the meaning of that picture. And that allows them to later be perceived more easily and remembered better. So we're starting to kind of figure out what helps make things kind of stick better in the brain.
It sounds like, though, also your work is very relevant to the whole AI technology.
So it's been really fascinating over the last few years to watch large language models like ChatGPT, emerge. I think for a long time, people were skeptical that artificial agents would be able to process language the way that they are now doing so. And so we have begun to both use those models as tools to help us try to understand what humans are doing, but also there's an inherent interest in how are the models like humans? How are they different from humans? How does that change our understanding of what language and meaning are like?
And are you working with large language models?
We are working with some large language models right now, often using them as a tool. So large language models are nice ways to kind of find out. So another big part of my work is looking at prediction in language. So I'm trying to understand. So part of what allows us to process language as fluently as we do is that we are often actively anticipating what words and what meanings might be coming up next. And so, of course, if we're right, that makes processing much easier. If we're wrong, though, we have to do certain things to fix our predictions, and it has some consequences for memory. So we've been interested for many years now in the processes that allow you to predict, how prediction changes over age, and also how it affects our memory. But often it's hard to know. So in order to study prediction, we have to be able to measure what people are going to predict and how predictable that word is. And in the past, we've had to do that by asking people to just fill in the end of the sentence with the first word that comes to mind and trying to see how many people pick which words. But with the models, we can ask the models, what do you think is coming up next, and get an instantaneous response. And we can use that to get really fine-grained information about how well particular words fit particular sentences. And so that's been a really important tool for us.
On actually Newswise, there was a news release about your work, an organ that works based on electrical impulses.
Yeah.
Could you tell me more about that and what you see and how that works and integrate it into your work?
in order to study these internal sort of cognitive processes, what we're really taking advantage of is that, um, what the brain really is a whole bunch of neurons, of brain cells, and then neurons change their electrical properties. They activate or deactivate, and then they influence other neurons' electrical properties. So what you set up, right, is this pattern of electrical activity. One neuron, a couple other neurons turn on, a couple other neurons turn off. So you have these changing patterns of electrical activity over time, and this is across millions and millions and millions of neurons in the brain. And so what's cool about that from a measurement perspective is that this electrical activity is happening naturally, and it's generating electrical fields. So just, changes in electricity that we can actually detect even outside of the head itself. So to measure this, all we actually have to do is place a metal that is sensitive to electrical fields, so tin or silver or anything that can conduct electricity. We place a ring of metal, say, onto the head. It now is in the brain's electrical field. So when the brain's electrical field changes, the metal will change, sends that signal along a wire. Now, these are very small signals, but with sensitive equipment, we amplify it, we make it bigger, and then we can measure it. So if, for example, someone is reading a sentence and we have electrodes on their head, let's say they get a word in that sentence that doesn't make sense. A classic example in my field is, I take my coffee with cream and dog, as opposed to with cream and sugar. So at the moment that they look at the word dog, or that I show them the word dog or play them the word dog, I'm recording the electrical activity. It's going, there's more and less from all these different sensors on the head. I can sort of start looking from the point at which they got dog and compare that to another point where someone got the word sugar. And moment by moment, literally milliseconds, so fractions of second by fraction of second, we can monitor that brain activity. And what happens in this particular case is that beginning about a third of a second into processing the word dog versus the word sugar, you begin to see a difference. So that the word dog creates some negative going activity. So we describe our activity in terms of whether it is getting more positive or more negative. That doesn't mean, positive or negative in obviously a valence sense. It's just electrically more positive or negative, kind of like, magnetic fields. So which end of the field are you pointing toward? So you're getting some activity in a particular direction, in this case negative. It's going to peak just before half a second, and it's much more for the dog than it is for the sugar. And so by seeing something like that and then spending a lot of research characterizing it, we can say, aha, that is a signal that's telling us that the brain is doing something electrically, is eliciting this electrical pattern associated with a word that's hard to understand or doesn't fit its sentence well compared to one that does.
How the brain is working, and sometimes some people can find words more easily and faster, possibly. Does your work look at all about maybe some of the reasons why and how that can happen? Do you see that there are things that help people find words faster?
One of the things that can indeed make you faster to comprehend a word is if you were able to predict that, well, this is probably what this person is going to say. And there's all kinds of interesting then questions about what allows you to predict better in some circumstances than others, and how much language experience matters. And but at a very general level, young adults seem to really like to predict. And so if the sentence is leading in a particular direction, we can find evidence that they already are thinking of the word or thinking of the meaning before that word ever appears. And that is great, again, when you're right. The problem is that language isn't always as predictable as we think. And if you're wrong, then you have something active in your brain that you don't want to be active. So you kind of have to do something about that. You have to get something you weren't ready for active. And you kind of have to sort out all of those effects. And we some of what we measure are exactly those processes, that things that happen in the brain when you get something you didn't predict. Now we look at healthy older adults. So, folks over the age of 60, they have lots of language experience, but other things are changing with age. We have, it's a little harder to hold things in mind in our what we call our working memory. We've got some general processing slowness that tends to accrue as we age. And what we found is that older adults comprehend language really well. They don't experience difficulties with comprehension, but when you look to see how they're doing it, you see that they aren't doing as much prediction. So they may be sort of trading off, trying to guess ahead to be fast, with being able to be fast in a different way, maybe because, again, they have so much more experience. They have seen this unusual word more often than has a younger adult. So a part of our work over many years now has been trying to understand, these differences in how younger adults and older adults are solving this really complicated problem of trying to very quickly look up the meaning of words.
What do you think is the future of your field of study?
Right. So I do think that I think that recording from multiple people at once is part of the future, and really bringing this into the social domain. A really exciting aspect of my field is that, on the one hand, what we're doing seems complicated because we have to have these sensitive pieces of equipment that allow us to pick up these really tiny electrical fields. However, as with everything in our world, the ability to do that without having giant machines, everything is scaling down. And what that means is that you can now buy headsets that can measure brain activity pretty well, not quite with the level of sophistication we can in the laboratory, but getting closer and closer every year, meaning that we're going to get to the point quite rapidly where these kinds of measurements can be made not only in schools and doctors' offices, but in one's home. And we might even get to the point where we're all kind of routinely walking around with our brain activity being measured. And that offers all kinds of exciting possibilities, both to use this tool to do diagnosis, to have maybe in the moment knowledge of whether our students are understanding us in the classroom, to be able to, but people are doing really creative things to measure, coordination among dancers in the arts. You can imagine someone walking around a museum and having a sense of what they are enjoying more or less without them having to tell you, so that you could then, tell them what art to look at next. I mean, there's kind of these unlimited possibilities if you can have access to brain signals and then use those to kind of communicate back even to the wearer about what their brain is doing.
So kind of like our Aura rings or the Fitbits or the iWatches that give you the information about your sleep. They can give you the information about your brain activity today.
Yes. So now they can tell you, right? Because one of the things that we can do with our brain activity, for example, measures right now in the laboratory, is if I give somebody a bunch of words to study, and then I go test them and I find out which words they remembered, I can tell from the brain activity while they were studying which words they're likely to remember later. So if you are trying to learn a language and you have access to your own brain signals, you could have be told in advance before you're ever tested, these are the ones you probably haven't learned well enough yet. And so there's all kinds of aspects. I mean, really, probably most of what our brain is doing at any given time is not consciously available to us, in part because, we have limits in what we can bring into consciousness at any time. But some of that kind of activity just never is available to consciousness. It's just not of the form that consciousness can make use of. So, but if we can measure it and we can tell you about it, then you could actually use your own brain signals to kind of, guide learning and guide decision making.
It was so nice to talk to you today.
Curious by Nature is a production of Newswise. More than 7,000 journalists get the Newswise wires. Visit newswise.com and find out how to spread your news today.